On this story, we can bring in Thomas Roulet, senior lecturer in organizational theory and fellow in sociology and management at Girton College at the University of Cambridge. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Will this latest move from the government here in France be enough to quell the anger we are seeing on the streets?
Well, I mean, this movement focuses on something very specific, the fuel tax. So suspending the fuel tax is a first step, but the issue is that behind the Gilets jaunes, there is a much broader cause, which is around the fiscal pressure, so fighting fiscal pressure, around standards of living. And this much broader cause is much harder to grasp for the government. So there is a role, a work around interpretation of the demands of the Gilets jaunes, of translating those demands into actual policies, into political choices. And so this mechanism can create frustration on both sides, on the sides of the Gilets jaunes because they feel they are not understood, and on the side of the government because they are desperately trying to find a solution to the crisis, a political solution.
Now, you spoke about standards of living because we see that the Yellow Vest movement, the Gilets jaunes, as you're saying, is made up of a variety of actors with different interests. Given that everyone is not singing from the same song sheet, how long can this last? I mean, today we've had students who've been demonstrating across the country.
Yeah, you're making an excellent point. The movement, the strength of the movement so far was its broad appeal. You know, something very broad, the idea that there is this fight around the standard of living, the purchasing power. This is very broad, and everybody can find something into such movement. You know, everybody can feel appealed by such movement because everybody is concerned. And so they have no leader, no structure. And because of this broad appeal, there is a snowballing movement. There is organic growth around that movement. But what will happen next? I mean, how can they actually negotiate something concrete if they have such a broad appeal? Can they actually agree on leaders? And we have seen that the leaders of the movement were threatened by their own members. So there is no consensus around who should be the leader. There is no consensus around the structure. Some people think that the movement should be violent. Some people think that the movement should be political. It should lead to a political party. So nobody can agree on the purpose of the movement. And so far it has been the strength of the movement, but it could lead to the division of the movement in the next steps. If they cannot agree on an objective, on a purpose, on a leader, on a negotiation standpoint, then potentially there is a risk of fragmentation and a risk of division.
Okay, so this movement is not political for now. And as you said, it's a grassroots movement, but it has drawn elements from the far right and from the far left. And it, as you said, exposes people's frustrations. We're talking about standards of living here, things everyday people can identify with. So given that, it gets easily politicized.
It gets easily politicized, but within the movement, there is a disagreement on whether this movement should be close to one political party or should create its own political party. Within the same movement, you have people that are disappointed by Macron, who voted Macron. You have people that are at the extreme right, people that are at the extreme left. So how can you create a platform that puts all of those people together? So far, they were all together, they were holding hands because there was this broad idea of fighting for the standards of living, fighting for the middle class that is being squeezed, but they need to agree on a concrete political standpoint, or they need to rely on the government to make an interpretation of the standpoint, and then this will necessarily lead to a frustration because there will be some misunderstanding between a government, Edouard Philippe, Macron, who are trying to understand what they should do, and the fuel tax, I mean, is one example. They are trying to tackle one thing while there is a much broader cause behind it, and they don't know how to tackle this broader cause around the standard of living, around the fiscal pressure, and there are mixed demands from the movements around better social conditions, but at the same time less tax. So how to create a platform that can reunite all of those political opinions together will be very difficult. And the more we move forward, the more the Gilets jaunes have to get concrete around their movement, around the objective of the movement, the harder it will be for the movement to hold together.
I mean, you keep talking about this movement. Given that the prime minister, the president's own party, La République en Marche, started off as a movement, do you think Emmanuel Macron has what it takes to appeal to these people and come face to face and talk directly to them? Because that's how his party got created, by going door to door and asking people what they wanted.
A very good point. If we think about the history of social movements, I mean, in the world, in France, we have experienced Nuit Debout in 2016. Nuit Debout also was born on social media and was federated on social media. Occupy Wall Street had some of the same features. All of those movements, they had no leader, no structure, but it was very hard for political spheres, for political leaders to engage with those movements. And those are very different than political movements, because the movement of Macron was created as a political vehicle, while here it's created as a vehicle of contestation. So it's to contest policies, to target a very specific culprit, here the government, to defend something very, very broad. So there are similarities with the movement of Macron, but there are also a number of differences that makes it harder, I think, for those people to be brought back into the political debates, And I think that will be the key challenge for Macron, would be to engage those people on the political stage. What do you want? What should I do to satisfy you? What are the key problems that you are pointing out? And there are key issues around the feeling of feeling squeezed, the feeling that the purchasing power is going down. So there is a key issue behind that Macron probably in the first few years of his mandate has not been able to grasp yet, and he will need to tackle and understand what is going on there to design policy that can address those issues.
Okay, Thomas Roulet, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this evening from Cambridge. In other